Tall Tale TV.
Of Monsters and Mushrooms by Lesley Herron. Chapter 17, Boletus. It's a curious thing how your priorities rearrange themselves when you're falling through a gateway to an unknown world. And considering this was his third jump, Vel couldn't stop his brain from running through random thoughts, like if Sadie had come to collect Trashbot yet. Was it even still in one piece? Did the other merchant, the one Attila had so foolishly traded with, beat her to it? Had he left the stove on? The trip through the vortex was short and sweet, thankfully not giving him time enough to search for an answer to all those questions. The exit of the portal was 7 feet off the ground and hanging horizontal in the air. It was like emerging from the end of a tube slide, and they landed on their feet, gently in the middle of a field. It was a pleasant enough place to be dropped, and quite politely, he might add. The land was laid out flat before them, stretching as far as the eye could see, with nothing surrounding them but a field of dancing, cattail-like reeds. They swayed and hummed on a gentle, warm breeze. There was even a glorious sunset, painting everything, including the neighboring planet in the sky, a violent shade of crimson.
Change it! Change it! Change it!
Attila and Evan's voice punctuated Vel's moment of peace simultaneously, and he felt a nerve twitch just below his mechanical eye.
I'm trying!
Eric shot, as his fingers fumbled uselessly around the cylindrical surface of the portal locker. Vel thought about protesting, about how this didn't seem like such a bad realm to live in. They could build a shelter from the copious amounts of singing reeds, and spend their days basking in the warm light of an orange sun. But when a heavy hand began tapping him furiously on the shoulder, he could feel that moment of serenity slip away. He attempted to ignore it, trying to hold on to his moment of peace. But as the jabbing grew harder, he felt his patience evaporate.
What?
He snarled, whirling around to face Brig with a hateful sneer. Brig hadn't actually been looking at him, but instead was gawking up at something in the sky. It had only been sheer dumb luck that he happened upon Vel's shoulder instead of Attila's. Vel followed his gaze upward. There, in stark contrast to the vivid warm hues of the sun, was a pillar of black swirling directly above them. He moved out from beneath the gateway and felt a surprise ripple through him. It wasn't a sinister wind devil or a scattered storm, even though it was like looking directly into the funnel of a tornado, but a pillar of flying creatures, a massive collection of alien birds, so considerable in quantity that it almost reached the upper atmosphere. Vel could just make out the details of one of the beasts when it swooped low, surveying them with several beady black eyes. They looked like they were carved from ink-coated steel, and then were forged with 2 sets of molten red wings. The backdraft they were creating had finally reached the ground, gusting and whipping around them violently. It caused them to stagger back a step, and an angry shrill shriek of squawks announced they had been spotted.
I don't mean to add to the tension by giving you my 2 cents,
Brig started, concern overtaking his features as he backed slowly under the gateway, his eyes still trained upon the collapsing pillar of angry birds.
Hurry up and get this damn portal changed,
Vel called, ducking back beneath the swirling gate for cover. The birds began diving at them from all directions. They plummeted and swooped only to veer away at the last second, striking out with furious swipes. Vel threw his arm up to shield his face, and sharp talons dragged uselessly against metal. Other parts of him weren't so lucky, as he felt serrated claws dig into his flesh. Attila ran towards the swarming mass, swinging his hat above his head in an attempt to startle the birds.
Get out of here, or I'll deep fry the lot of you. I'll serve you up with gravy and...
Attila collapsed to the ground, scrambling to return to the relative cover of the portal as he was pelted by avian torpedoes. Vel knocked away one of the birds, pausing long enough to shout over the clamorous call.
What are you doing over there? Hurry up so we can get out of here. I got it,
Eric cried out triumphantly. He had finally found the destination dial and gave it a mighty spin. He covered his head with his free hand, shoved the device in his pocket, and bolted towards the rest of the group. The portal lurched to a stop, the vortex inside suspending for a brief moment before it began to rotate in the opposite direction. The color inside the gate shifted from a deep emerald green to a static-filled and somber cobalt. Attila and Eric had started an argument about the best way to re-enter the portal, as it was just out of reach above their heads, when Brig butted in and grabbed Attila by the poncho. He offered up his solution by chucking his friend up through the gate. He laughed a deep, resounding, hearty laugh as he grabbed a hold of a protesting Eric and helped him up in the same fashion. He continued his baritone laughter as he made to grab Vel. But at the look on his face, Brig changed tactics and deposited Evan instead. Vel nodded approvingly.
I'll give you a hand up.
He bent low, cupping his hands together and bracing for the large man's weight.
What about you?
Brig hesitated, looking down at himself and then over the other man's scrawny frame. Vel shrugged and then motioned at his hands.
It's fine. Let's go already.
Brig decided against arguing any farther and took towards Vel with a small run. He was heaved upwards through the gateway with all the strength of a malfunctioning cybernetic arm. He looked down, straining his eyes against the swirling air around him, to see that Vel had kept a firm grip on the boot he had just hoisted through the portal, using Brig's momentum to carry him up into the vortex. Smart. Each gate they had traversed so far had greeted them with a different environment and surreal sensations, with the portal to the otherworld being the worst. Spending a week mid-step can put a strain on your psyche, and while the second gate had spat them out 100 feet in the air, the vortex itself had been almost imperceptible, which meant this gate was tied for worst, as it sent them hurtling towards its exit at alarming speeds. The wind that tore past them felt like standing too close to a passing train and caused everyone's eyes to tear up. Vel squinted as he heard Attila and Evan cry out at being flung from the gate like bullets shot from a gun. Damn it! He was absolutely positive now. He had left the stove on. Great. Sure, he wouldn't have a home to go back to when this was all said and done. He began to sourly chew at his cheek. There is no perceivable weather in the otherworld, and the rainforest had only offered them a sweltering, humid heat. But the bad thing about the Ashlands, about home, was the lack of seasons. It only felt like varying degrees of constant summer, with 299 days of baking sun and relentless dry wind. But to be fair, the other 60 days were filled with rain. Acid rain, that is. A poisonous, muggy fog that always refuses to let up. So, as Vel exited the portal, soaring majestically over a snow-covered expanse of mountainside, he couldn't contain his fascination from eclipsing his anger. Well, until he face-planted directly into the snow, of course. He rolled, tumbled, flew over the edge of a drop-off, and landed in a snowbank taller than most men.
Sweet frosty bits! It's colder than a saloon gal's heart out here,
Brig mentioned, sitting up. Where the last two realms had been alive with color and teeming with life, this place seemed to have been drained of both. The air was frigid, and a steely gray wind gusted around them angrily. They had landed in the middle of a frozen gale, snow and sleet pelting them from all directions. It wouldn't be long before they were coated in layers of ice.
We should probably get out of here, and soon,
stammered Evan, who was still clothed in his wedding garb. He rubbed his tiny hands against his bare arms. Flower petals and chunks of bark didn't make for good insulation. Attila popped up out of a drift.
But it's snow! I've never seen snow before!
He spun around, looking up at the sky in wonder, catching a flurry of flakes on his tongue.
Get off!
Eric's voice was muffled by Attila's weight.
Oh, sorry.
Eric didn't wait for the merc to shift into action and shoved him away. He let out a shiver as he sifted through the snow with numb fingers, searching for his glasses. He let out a dejected huff as he pulled out a bent frame, only to watch several shards of lens fall free. He pocketed the worthless spectacles and squinted around the barren landscape.
Where's Vel?
There was an angry, muffled cry somewhere behind them. They turned to see 4 fingertips just barely poking out of the deepest part of the snow mound. Brig bit back on his chuckle as he wandered over and reached into the slush to wrench free the cyborg. With a look almost as steely as the air around him, Vel brushed the snow off his clothes before wrapping his duster tighter around himself.
We need to get out of here before we freeze to death.
He looked down at his mechanical hand as he clenched his fingers into a fist. The action was stiff and jarring. The joints had already begun to lock up. He could see the frost building up on the dull plating. It wouldn't be long before they froze over completely. And that was if he survived the impending frostbite of metal against flesh. Brig plucked Evan out of the snow and tucked him into the front of his vest like a wayward pup. He laced it up around him and turned back to the group.
The angry cyborg is right. Do you have the portal changing device?
Brig asked, his attention focused on Eric. Attila had busied himself rolling around in the snow, tossing it in the air, and packing snowballs together to make one big one.
What's the rush? Let's enjoy it. It's not like Alpha can track us through 2 portals. We're safe.
He deposited the medium-sized snowball on top of the larger one and began pancaking more handfuls of slush together. Eric scowled at Attila's optimism and reached into his pocket.
Actually, I have some concerns about...
His fingers brushed against the coat lining before he found a sizable hole torn into it by sharp talons. He felt around another pocket, and then another, before he looked back up their descent path.
Damn it.
He let out a frustrated sigh, cursing further under his breath.
Why do you guys keep dropping stuff? I'm gonna have to get you some tape or something. This is getting ridiculous.
Evan shot from beneath Brig's warm, albeit slightly musty, vest.
Just have Vel track it with his cyber eye. It should be giving off a frequency.
Attila called out over the howling wind. He was carving a face into the third mound he had placed atop the other 2, creating a snowman.
I'm trying,
Vel replied, his voice almost lost in the storm. He was struggling to get the operating system for his eye to cooperate. It would flicker in and out, giving him only brief glimpses of red outlined terrain before it would fritz and reboot.
There's something up there, but I can't hone in on it.
He tried again, growling in frustration when his vision remained black.
It's no use. It's too cold out here. Well, we'll just have to look for it the old-fashioned way,
Brig pointed out as he turned to face the storm. Attila had just deposited 2 handfuls of snow to a snowman, giggling. He nodded to himself as he carved a giant smile on its face, and then joined the others as they fell in line behind Brig. Unaffected by the cold, Attila volunteered to scour the drifts for the portal locker. This usually consisted of him diving into the snow, burrowing around as he searched, and then popping out of the banks to adjust his bearings, which made him look like a scrawny and goofy-looking gopher. Brig cut a path for the rest to follow, using his own body to plow through the snow. He shivered uncontrollably, his face red with windburn and buried beneath a growing layer of frozen mustache and eyebrow icicles. Time seemed to slow around them, each minute ticking by with sickening suspension. It was like being stuck in the gate to the other world all over again. After what felt like several hours, they had only just reached the base of the summit. They still had to scale up the steep slope, which was much more intimidating from this vantage point.
Are we gonna talk about what you mentioned back there? About Alpha?
Brig asked, looking over his shoulder at Eric.
What do you mean?
He knew the answer to this question already, but Eric didn't know if he was ready to admit it out loud. He pulled his coat in tighter, trying to shield more of his face from the biting wind.
You said you had some concerns.
Evan's reply was almost missed, muffled by the fur lining of Briggs' vest and the raging storm that continued to buffet against them.
We jumped twice and changed the portal location on him, right? You're implying that that's not enough?
Briggs asked, looking up at the steep incline. He tilted his head to one side and then the other, cracking the joints there with ease. He clenched his fingers together, snapping some relief into his stiff knuckles. He then slammed a meaty hand into the snow and began to climb, carving out handholds in the ice for the others to follow him.
I think Alpha did something to the locker when he inspected it. Back on the temple top, I felt it give a pulse, and I'm positive Alpha did too. He looked right at me. It's almost like there's a piece of him in there, or something, that calls to him.
So, why are we looking for this thing again?
Briggs asked as he continued to gouge out snow from the frozen rock face.
So's we can get out of here, you big lug.
Evan snapped. He poked his head out of the back of Briggs' vest and was now facing Eric.
Let's just hurry up and find the stupid device so we can change the portal. We can just toss the locker into a different realm afterwards.
Without the device, we have no way of getting home, any of our homes. And it's not that easy, either way. Alpha has the means to follow us, wherever he pleases.
Eric was finding it harder to keep his teeth from clacking together, and no matter how tightly he pulled his coat against himself, he couldn't keep out the frigid wind.
What are we gonna do then?
Evan's tiny voice asked again, as he ducked back down into the warm depths of the vest.
We'll just have to keep jumping until we find a realm that has the right technology. If I can upgrade the portal locker, we can lure him back into the other world and seal him away for good. We can't let him ruin other realms.
Eric didn't have much faith in his words, even as he issued them. That was a tall order. Find a world that had working tech, hope that it interfaced with what was already in the device, and then lure Alpha back to that desert wasteland, and get out before he trapped them in there with him.
I found it!
Attila piped up, emerging from the snow at the top of the hill. He held the metal treasure over his head triumphantly, looking down at them. He paused, squinting against the blinding flurries.
Where's Val?
Eric stopped to look behind them. Vel lay face down in the snow at the bottom of the incline. He was still and subdued, the only movement coming from his coat, blustering in the wind. Briggs plucked Evan from his coat and handed him roughly to Eric. He then slid down the path he had just carved before the doctor could even ask him to. He was acting on the instinct to save someone's life. Death would have to wait another day to claim this cyborg. He reached down and wrenched Vel free from his frozen bed with one hand. He tossed the unconscious man over his shoulder and began the treacherous climb back up the cliffside. Evan pulled a face at Eric as Briggs passed them by. He struggled to get free in a vain attempt to return to the warmer coat. When they reached the peak, they found a small army of snowmen and, well, women. Some of them had been more gifted than others, and Attila had arranged them in a variety of inappropriate positions. Attila was putting the finishing touches, a very familiar style hat, on a rather muscular snowman. Eric gave Attila a flat look as he reached down and pulled the portal locker from the well-endowed, muscular snowman. He was too numb to scold Attila, and instead spun the dial with his frozen fingers. Briggs was shaking his head slowly, even as one of his eyebrows shot up at a few of the more athletic snowmen. He offered Attila a look of pure disappointment when the gateway began to spin faster, the colors inside shifting to a reddish brown. He adjusted Vel's weight and turned to face the portal. They breathed a collective sigh of relief as a warm breeze washed over them from the other side. Forgetting about Attila's inappropriate snowmen, they stepped through the vortex. Of Monsters and Mushrooms, an ongoing series by Lesley Herron, is a crossover fanfiction, mixing her own characters and settings with a few of those created by author J.D. Wiley. She writes for the fun of devising new ways of messing with her characters and seeing just how much trouble they can get into.
Hey, Evan. Evan! Yeah? You see that snow lady over there? Yeah? What about it? Her. I think she's giving you the cold shoulder. Get it? Cause she's made out of ice. And ice is cold?
That's it, man. You just lost your pun privileges.
What? No fair! I had lots more ice jokes.